So you'll get voice notes, but you don't get voice notes. So I've had a heart to go in. You've heard of high tech, right? And there's tech cell fingers. I was starting one of those.
Please come join us in the ballroom and take a seat. Our program will begin in just a few minutes.
ما بعرف إذا ما غلطان في عنده واحد على اليمين عليه واحد ثاني.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is beginning.刘小波的和王军涛的两篇文章。
خروجي domination.
Please put your hands behind your back so I can cuff you. You don't know
كاك
and you will I'm going to be, I need to connect you. I go to, I'm all over the place. Joel's, Benway State, McCurdy. You're from Benway. I just rebuilt.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Katrina Lantos Sweat.
Good afternoon. What a pleasure and what a source of encouragement it is to see all of you gathered here together for this Civil Society Congress, which is really the kickoff of what I believe will be 3 extraordinary days that we're going to spend together. You know, there will be plenty of times when we will be heartbroken in the coming days, hearing about instances of persecution and discrimination and violence targeted against communities of faith. But I hope, I truly hope, that we will also all feel heartened, that we will be strengthened by one another's commitment, by the testimonies we hear, and by the determination of the hundreds of people gathering for the Civil Society Congress at the Earth Summit to follow, to fight with all our heart, might, mind, and strength for freedom of religion for everyone, everywhere, all the time. You have an extraordinary afternoon ahead of you, and so I will end my remarks here simply with a warm welcome and a heartfelt thanks to each of you for being part of this historic event. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Greg Mitchell. I'm the chairman of IRF Secretariat. The IRF standing for International Religious Freedom, of course. But thank you so much, Katrina, and thanks to you and Ambassador Sam Brownback for serving as co-chairs once again, and for spending so much of your time and effort to pull this all together. Please give a round of applause to our co-chairs. As chairman of IRF Secretariat, which is the legal entity host and title partner, welcome to IRF Summit 2022. And welcome to the Civil Society Congress. It's only fitting that this is the opening session of this year's summit, which is a civil society-led summit. As you know, the ministerials to event religious freedom started in 2018. They are government-led, organized, and funded. This summit was started by Ambassador Brownback last year as the premier civil society gathering. And it's self-organized and self-funded by dozens of convening partners from civil society. So its success is made possible by each and every one of you. So I want to thank you all for your leadership, and give yourselves a round of applause. As with the summit, the growing global movement will succeed because of you. That's why we invited you all to submit and make opening statements that contain innovative solutions for the global movement to advance religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, and all the time. Why do we need innovative solutions? Put simply, there's never been more advocacy and government actions to advance religious freedom, yet persecution has never been worse. Despite 20 plus years of increasing civil society advocacy and government actions, going back to the passage of the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, and the creation of the IRF office at the State Department, and the IRF ambassador, the annual reports, and USERF, and other countries that have since followed suit with their own ambassadors and special envoys, and the IRF roundtables and other civil society networks and the ministerials. Despite all of that, the Pew Research Center still reports that roughly 80% of the world's population lives in countries with high or very high levels of overall restrictions on religion. So traditional advocacy by itself has proven to be insufficient to reduce persecution and social hostilities. We're all doing tremendous work, but what else do we need to be doing? What else can we do? It's up to us to innovate. As former Ambassador Robert Seipel once told me when I asked him a question about how can we get governments to do more on this, he said, don't wait for governments. Don't rely on governments. We can work with governments whenever possible, but it's up to us. We have to take the lead. We have to show the way forward and hold government's feet to the fire. But why? Why is this important? For that, I want to introduce one of the first leaders of the IRF movement. Tom Farr is the president of the Religious Freedom Institute and the director of its IRF Policy Action Team. He's a leading authority on religious freedom. He served for 28 years in the Army, in the U.S. Foreign Service. He was the first director of the IRF office at the State Department when IRFA passed in 1998. He directed the Witherspoon Institute's IRF task force. He served on the Secretary of State's IRF working group. He directed the Religious Freedom Project at Georgetown's Berkeley Center. And he's published many works, including a book that shaped U.S. religious freedom legislation and foreign policy. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to introduce Tom Farr.
Thank you, Greg. It's an honor to be here with you, and it's an honor to have been asked to frame the issue for this summit. So I'm going to do that by engaging a foundational question. Why is religious freedom important for everyone everywhere? And perhaps more to the point, why should you and I, regardless of our political or religious beliefs, Now, I'm going to give you my answer, drawing on my own Catholic tradition and on the American founders. I hope you see your own views represented in what I have to say. Religious freedom is important because human beings must have the freedom to be religious. Religion is the natural, powerful quest by every human conscience to determine whether there's a greater than human source of our existence, our being, of ultimate meaning, and of true happiness in this life, and if there is one, in the next. To deny any human being the freedom to conduct this search and to live in accord with the truths he or she discovers is to attack the very core of human dignity, the very heart of what it means to be human. Freedom of religion is therefore not a privilege granted by government. It's a natural, inalienable right given to every human being by God. It's the duty and the right of conscience to discern the truth about religion and to exercise religion, alone or with others, in private and in public. Religious freedom by its nature excludes compulsion. No person may be compelled or manipulated by any human agent, especially government, to seek God or to worship Him. God Himself neither compels nor manipulates. He loves and He beckons. We should imitate Him. This view of religious freedom and human dignity is for me a source of extraordinary inspiration. It motivates me to fight for the religious freedom of every human being, and I hope it does you too. And in fact, this noble idea of religious freedom as human dignity is so compelling that it's been affirmed many times in the modern world, in international covenants, national constitutions, statutes, books by scholars, speeches by government officials, and by politicians. And yet, millions of our fellow human beings remain subject to violent, sometimes deadly religious persecution, or to invidious religious discrimination. They are real human beings, these millions, real families, real communities of people who are paying a profound cost for their religious consciences. We mustn't forget them, we must listen to them, we must fight for them. We must fight, for example, for the Muslims of China. Miracle to her son, a real mother with a real family, was imprisoned in a Chinese re-education camp, tortured, deprived of sleep, and repeatedly subjected to electric shock. Her 6-week-old triplets were taken from her, and one died. Why do Chinese authorities do this to an innocent woman and her babies? Because Miracle is a Uyghur Muslim who was living in a totalitarian atheist society that targets her version of Islam and any other religion that posits an authority greater than part of the state. The Chinese communist regime murders and harvests the organs of members of the fallen God. It employs violence to transform the religion of Tibetan Buddhism into an arm of the state. It destroys churches whose believers resist the state. And it's attacking Christian public witness by the process of scientization, indoctrinating the young with the lie that human beings are not created free by God, but are the wards and party in the state. You and I must fight for Miracle, her Muslim community, and all the religious minorities in totalitarian China. We must also fight for the Christians of Nigeria. Last month, as her helpless father looked on, Deborah Emmanuel Yakubu was stoned, tortured, murdered, and her body burned to ashes by hundreds of her fellow college students who were Muslims. Why did they do this? Because they were taught to hate people like Deborah, who embraced the faith that they reject. On Pentecost Sunday, scores of Nigerian Catholics were slaughtered while worshiping at Mass. Several priests have been murdered since The answer is not climate change. The root cause is a deformed and inhumane hatred of those whose religion is different. It's the inevitable, deadly outcome when young people are taught to loathe other human beings whose religious beliefs they reject, or when they are taught to loathe religion itself. Unfortunately, we are seeing in Western democracies themselves a retreat from religious liberty. Many are rejecting particular forms of religion or religion itself. Anti-Semitism continues to raise its vile and violent head in Western democracies. Hatred of Islam and Muslim minorities remains far too prevalent. Both of these threaten democracy itself. In democratic Finland, Päivi Räsänen, a member of parliament, has been subjected to criminal prosecution because she openly expressed her Christian beliefs about marriage and sexuality. This is the opposite of pluralism and religious freedom. You'll hear from Ms. Räsänen tomorrow, but she's not alone. In many Western democracies, including in the United States, ancient moral truths on the sacredness of human life, on marriage and sexuality, and on the natural distinctions between men and women are being labeled by those with power as irrational, bigoted, and untrue. But these ancient moral beliefs are neither irrational nor bigoted. They work. That's why they're ancient. They have endured because they represent a view of human nature grounded in faith and reason. Namely, that a person is self-evidently a unity of body and self, given by God. On the other hand, the new moral orthodoxy holds that the self, not God, is supreme, and that the body is merely an instrument of self. Well, if that's true, then complete sexual freedom is both rational and desirable, as is the changing of my bodily sex to conform with what my self desires. But what if it isn't true? What if this new moral approach represents a flight from reality, harms children, and leads to suffering and deep unhappiness? In a democracy, everyone has the right to believe what they wish, but no one has the right to silence those who disagree. Unfortunately, that is the stated goal of those in America, who are labeling traditional religious believers as haters, as bigots, as racists, even as fascists. Facebook and Twitter routinely cancel believers who post their traditional moral views. At this summit, there are many who have experienced this anti-liberal intolerance. Public school boards have arrogated to themselves the authority to indoctrinate children in the new moral orthodoxy, whether their parents agree or not, and in some cases, even without denial. The current administration has said it will bring the full force of the federal government down on those who do not accept government-imposed moral orthodoxy. Violent attacks on Roman Catholic churches and sacred sites have increased over the past 2 years and have recently become endemic. This past Sunday, my parish church had an armed guard up front. Something I had never imagined could happen, and it should not be happening in America. The American founders feared state-enforced morality as a religious tyranny. They guaranteed the right of religious free exercise for everyone in order to encourage free and equal religious citizens to debate public morality. They were wise to do so because those with traditional moral views have contributed much to our common good and warrant a continuing, vigorous voice in this country. The attempt to coerce them, to cancel them, to silence them, represents an impulse worthy of China, not America. Unfortunately, this problem has also entered American foreign policy. The State Department is demanding that nations with traditional moral beliefs. Either accept contemporary Western views of sexual morality, or risk losing you as a life-saving and life-changing investment. This is the opposite of advancing religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. Pope Francis is rightly called an ideological colonization. It's unworthy of our nation and any nation that purports to defend justice, human dignity, and human freedom for everyone. So let me sum up. Why is religious freedom important? Because it lies at the heart of what it means to be human. Because a society that affords all its citizens full religious freedom generates good things for everyone, including those who disagree. Here's how the Summit Charter put it, and I quote, "Full equality of religious freedom for everyone can contribute to social harmony, economic prosperity, political stability, and the lowering of religion-related violence, and dramatically increase international justice, stability, and peace." Not a bad set of reasons, in fact. So let us stand as one, whatever our religious beliefs, whatever our political beliefs, in fighting for religious freedom, especially those of us blessed to live in free and democratic nations. At the summit, we're men and women of different religious and political convictions, but we are, I trust, united in one cause, the cause of universal human dignity, and its best, most humane, and most powerful defense, religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, all the time. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Thank you, Tom. I want to reiterate that very important point you just made. He said we are men and women of vastly different religious and political convictions, which means we all might not agree with everything he said. But we are united in one cause, and that's the key to the future, I believe. In this time of compounding negative disruptions that are dividing people and tearing societies apart, like religious nationalism, ethnic religious conflicts, genocides, wars, governments and civil societies have reached an inflection point. The global movement needs new approaches. We will talk more about this at our partner dinner tomorrow night that our Secretariat is hosting. But with a generous grant from Templeton Religion Trust, our Secretariat is starting a 3-year project that will deliver disruptive innovation with an incredibly positive focus on bringing people together. Bringing people of all faiths and beliefs together in safe spaces around the world. Think of round tables in a public square. People of all faiths and beliefs engaging each other at those round tables in the public square across their deepest differences. Working together on community projects and issues of common concern, uniting into multi-faith coalitions, and engaging governments together to improve public policy, strengthen the rule of law, and secure religious freedom for everyone, as equal citizens. This is how you develop mutual respect, trust, and reliance between all faith and belief communities, and between those communities and their governments. The theme of this summit is religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, all the time. And throughout the program, you're going to see a sub-theme of all faiths and beliefs engaging each other, constructively and cooperatively, and pulling and working together. In fact, the program will preview 3 key multi-faith cross-cultural elements that are vitally important to our future success. First one being education, which you're going to hear about next. The Lomina Institute will showcase a cross-cultural religious literacy case study on how it has reached more than 1,500, I think it's an even higher number now, madrasa teachers across Indonesia, with Abrahamic instructors teaching the teachers about how to engage one another with mutual respect. 2 will be relationship building. The Multi-Faith Neighbors Network will tell stories of their multi-faith clerical relationship building seminars and their most recent successful results from the relationship building they do across faiths. And then 3 is multi-faith actions in the public square. Nadine Mayenza, former chair of USERF and the Religious Freedom Institute, Jeremy Barker, will tell the story of multi-faith gatherings that have developed organically in northeast Syria and what we can learn from them. The vision is that the more people of all faiths and beliefs learn about each other from each other, the more they will understand each other. And the more people of all faiths and beliefs engage and interact with each other, break bread together, work together on community projects, the more likely they will respect each other. And the more people of all faiths and beliefs work together in the public square and engage governments in multi-faith fashion and stand up for each other, the more they will trust and rely on each other. The hope is that more people of all faiths and beliefs embrace and embody a cooperative engagement approach and unite across their deepest differences. They are able to become builders of religious freedom, inclusion, and cohesion. This is what will undermine religious extremism, radicalization, and terrorism. With that, it's time to hear about the first story. We'll hear from the Lemay Institute about their cross-cultural religious literacy case study. And with that, I can introduce Matthias Ho of the Lemay Institute. He's got 2 of his colleagues that are teaching in the madrasas. Matthias Ho.
Thank you, Greg. I'm Matthias Ho from the Lemay Institute. First of all, we want to thank the co-chairs of this Group Summit, Dr. Katrina Lantoswet and Ambassador Sam Brownway. So I'm here with 2 of my great colleagues in the project that we are doing in Indonesia. It's a huge challenge because the 3 of us need to share the 15 minutes to explain about the program. So first of all, we are going to hear from Dr. Alwi Shihab, who is a senior fellow at the Lemay Institute, but also a foremost Muslim scholar in Indonesia, and a former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Indonesia, and a former Special Envoy to Middle East and OIC. And then after that, I will explain a bit more about the program in Indonesia. And then the last one will be Dr. Ari Gordon, who is also teaching in the course, and he is the Director of Muslim-Jewish Relations at the American Jewish Committee, AJC, in the United States. So with that, I would like to invite Dr. Alwi Shihab to give his first remarks.
Assalamu alaikum, shalom, peace be upon all of us. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, religious extremism, sometimes compounded by socio-political extremism, has become one of the major problems globally. Islam, the noble religion that I hold so dearly, has been misused by extremists to pursue the establishment of their twisted idea of Islamic State. It has grown and spread rapidly, oftentimes by taking advantage of the freedom of expression under democracy. However, you cannot eradicate ideology by simply attacking them physically. Destroying Al-Qaeda and ISIS without addressing their ideology will never stop their extremist movement. The collapse of ISIS caliphate could mean setback on the ground for the extremists, but their ideology remained resilient and reappeared after that. Coming from the country with the world's largest Muslim population and concerned with the extremism problem that continues to plague many Muslim countries, we need to remember that war of ideology is about winning the people's heart and mind, not winning territory. Therefore, it is important to win the heart and mind of the Islamic and other religious communities, particularly the young generation. because they are going to be the future leaders of their countries. This is why education, especially religious education, is very important to win the war. Humility, speaking of Islamic extremist ideology, we need to revisit the history of relation between the three Abrahamic religious communities, Muslim, Christian, and Jews. Even though they share a lot in common in their historical roots, throughout history there has been a lot of tension, even conflict between them. Despite our disagreement over the conflict, for example, the Crusades, we need to recognize their significant impact on the rise of extremism, especially because conflict can influence how people interpret their holy texts. In a traumatic situation after the vicious Mongol invasion, Ibn Taymiyyah, the 13th century Islamic scholar, was born. One of his very famous book titled Al-Jawab al-Sahih liman baddala din al-Masih, the right response to those who alter the religion of Christ. Very provocative. He is renowned for his harsh fatwas, religious decrees against philosophy, Sufism, Shiite, and Christianity. 5 centuries later, his fatwas inspired Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab of Saudi Arabia, who rejected all forms of Christian Western culture. Then he founded Wahhabism, a radical Puritan movement that has influenced many extremist groups in the Muslim countries. Today, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict continues to strain the relation between the Abrahamic religions. The hostility, supported by their corrupt understanding of the religious texts, has been passed down from generation to generation up till today, creating damages beyond the Abrahamic religions. We need to break this change of hostility with bold humility. Humility to recognize the problem within our own religious communities and to correct it. And the good in other religious communities to learn from. So correcting and learning. Humility to recognize that we need to collaborate with other faith communities. Boldness to take the necessary steps innovatively. Boldness to move beyond rhetoric to action, beyond interfaith to multi-faith collaboration. And this is what we have been working on in Indonesia. As senior fellow at Lemena Institute, Jakarta, a Christian organization, I have been involved in the design and implementation of this training program for madrasa teachers, or religious school teachers, because they are very important in enlightening the students. I teach them how to understand the Quranic verses regarding Muslim, Christian, and Jewish relations that are often misinterpreted and misused by extremists. The program is based on cross-cultural religious literacy concept that was developed by Dr. Chris Heitler, Senior Fellow at the University of Washington. Christian and Jewish scholars also teach in this program. It has grown to involve many reputable Islamic organizations in Indonesia and outside, becoming a model of moving beyond rhetoric to action, beyond interfaith dialogue to multi-faith collaboration. It is a small yet concrete concrete step toward reforming religious education to stop religious intolerance and extremism. Next, we will learn about the program in more detail from Mr. Matheus. And I would like to thank you for your patience. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom.
Can I have my slides up, please? So before I start, I also want to thank the Indonesian Minister of Law and Human Rights, His Excellency Yasona Lawli, who is taking the time from his very busy schedule to be with us today. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think that really shows the seriousness of the Indonesian government in this topic. So can I have my slides? Okay, thank you. So I'll just go quickly about the technical things about our program. So our program is based on what's called the cross-cultural religious literacy. If you want to know more about that, you can get the book. It's written there. So it's basically based on 3 competencies: personal, comparative, and collaborative. The idea is basically how we move beyond interfaith dialogue into multi-faith collaboration. Because we believe that it's not enough simply to have a nice, warm dialogue about peace between the different religious believers, but how we can work together, because that's really the task. So in what we are doing in this program, this is our one-week curriculum of the online program. So in 3 days, the students or the participants of this program will have a live interaction using Zoom, and then 2 days of self-study using learning management system. What is being discussed in that program? So, the bottom one is actually the curriculum, the content. So we have discussed about the cross-cultural religious literacy framework. But not only that, we use the Abrahamic religious approach to discuss about Islam from the Muslims, Muslim scholars, and also about Christianity from a Christian pastor, and then about Judaism from Jewish scholars. Now, who is the beneficiary, the audience of this? Well, the audience, we begin with the madrasah teachers. So in Indonesia, we have more than 80,000 madrasahs from K to 12 and almost 900,000 teachers. So we begin with that. So you can see this is actually a groundbreaking program in Indonesia, how the madrasah teachers, but not only madrasah teachers, but also other Muslim teachers, learning about this cross-cultural religious literacy and learning about the different religions in the Abrahamic faiths, and see how to work together in that. So these are all the different Islamic partners that we are working with, the National Mosque, Islamic University, and others, as you can see. So far, within 7 months, we have more than 2,400 teachers have graduated from this program from 33 provinces. Indonesia have 34 provinces, so it's almost the whole Indonesia. We are still doing this program every 2 weeks, so we have more than 100 teachers every 2 weeks graduating from this program. So again, we want to thank the Indonesian Ministry of Law and Human Rights, because we just signed an agreement as well to develop an advanced course for these teachers to learn about freedom of religion and belief from the constitutional and legal perspective. We are also working with the State Islamic University, one of the leading one in Indonesia, to train the teachers how to develop the lesson plan. So what's next? Well, there are more opportunities, more partnerships will be in line. For example, we are working with the Christian School Foundation to develop a similar program for Christian teachers, and we are also going to develop partnership with the Institute in Ghana and also the World Muslim Communities Council in Abu Dhabi, UAE. With that, I would like to invite Dr. Ali Gordon as one of the instructors in the program.
So I know we're short on time. I'll compress my remarks. I'm Ari Gordon. I oversee Muslim-Jewish relations at American Jewish Committee. I'm one of the Jewish teachers in this program, along with Ambassador Rabbi David Sacristy, who's actually backstage. You'll hear from him soon. And Rabbi David Rosen, AJC's Director of International Interreligious Affairs based in Jerusalem. You heard about the need on the ground from Dr. Shihab, and Matthias told you about the program itself. And I want to talk to you about what works, why it works, and from a non-Indonesian perspective, how this package, how this model can be used elsewhere. And I'll do so fairly quickly. I think there's 3 ingredients. 1, is frankly just the technology. While all of us were battened down and at home during COVID, Matthias and the Lamina Institute got to work using Zoom to meet with my colleague Shira Lowenberg of AJC's Asia Pacific Institute, our interreligious team, with Chris Seifel of Templeton and IGE, the Institute for Global Engagement, and then built a roundtable so that people who did not have a chance to sit in a room together and might not even have opted to sit together if they had the opportunity to do so in person, could just click and enter a Zoom room, build trust. That trust turned into public seminars. It turned into the long list of impressive partners that Lamina signed on to this program, training teachers in cross-cultural religious literacy. I implore everyone in this room to use the technology, to use what COVID, a silver lining perhaps of this horrible pandemic. What it gave us was this openness to meeting people that you would normally only meet in person. Projects that would take years to develop because you'd meet someone at a conference and the next time you spoke to them was at another conference, and maybe you visited them 2 years later. We can compress time and space. People you meet here, reach out to them, set up a meeting, and start talking about what you can do together. One is the technology and communication. Two, partners on the ground. The Lamina Institute and their board of advisors, as you heard, knows all of the sensitivities. Doing cross-cultural work, if it matters, if it's important, it involves social risk. We cannot come in as outsiders and do this work in contexts that are not our own. We have to defer and give trust to the sensitivities on the ground from trusted, credible partners. Lamina has brought in outside voices, authentic voices, teaching Judaism and Christianity, but ultimately they are the drivers of this program, and they frame to make sure that we're pushing the envelope on what we can say, but not too far in a way that's rejected or doesn't match the needs on the ground. And the last thing I'll talk about is the CCRL, the Cross-Cultural Religious Literacy Model. And Chris Seifel has developed this. You saw the book that Matthias put up there. One of the reasons that it works so well is because it responds to the two big challenges that people in traditionalist mindsets have about this work. One, I have my truth and everyone else is wrong. And maybe if everyone else is wrong, maybe they're also the enemy. The other is that if I'm doing interfaith work, I'm going to be asked to say that everyone else has truth. And what the CCRL, Religious Literacy Model, does is it's not tepid tolerance. We're not saying, yes, you have truth, you can hate them, but you have to tolerate them. And we're not saying you need to acknowledge the truth of others. We develop knowledge to build empathy and respect for the phenomenological experience of people of other faiths, not for their truth systems. And what this allows us to do, and here I'll wind down, is it allows us to confront the challenges that globalization and the revolution in communications have given us. First, misinformation and disinformation and hate. We know that technology and various kinds of media can be part of the problem of dividing people. This program is using that technology through virtual trainings, through meetings with people from across the globe to do just the opposite, to make them discerning internal critics who can engage in the cultures of suspicion that may be there on the ground, but to do so with genuine knowledge. Two, that suspicion that if I learn about other faith traditions, I'm going to lose my own faith, is addressed because we are not asking the acknowledgement of other faiths, and in fact, we're doing something that's quite different. We're inviting people to be momentary outsiders to their own faith tradition by learning about others. And in doing so, especially in countries where there's a religious majority of one kind, when you see that there are others who value prayer, there are others who value some of the same belief systems that you have, there are others who have ritual practices, you lose the complacency, and difference trains you to love your own. So it does both of those things. And finally, cooperation, that most important value. We are asking people to work together on global challenges, and when we do, anyone who is confronting global challenges is going to have to work with people who disagree with them on something. This is just a tool for global citizenship. We can sell it, we can sell this product to the greatest skeptics because A, it's a tool for combating hate and making sure that the technology that many find threatening is actually used well. 2, it can strengthen people in their own faith tradition and practice. And 3, it's the only way that societies can be global players working with people of various differences. There is a great hunger for this, and I remember just one person who had a video testimonial of her experience, and she came from a very conservative province of Indonesia, and she said, I go onto the roof of my school building every night that we have a class, because that's where the internet is best, and I can watch this program, and I can learn about others, and I can be transformed, and I can bring it into my classroom, so that the youth of the next generation, the youth of our countries, can actually be these global citizens who have respect and empathy for the other without giving up on their own deeply held beliefs. It's a remarkable program. I hope that you'll learn to support this, and if you're interested in bringing it into your own context, please speak with Matthias, Dr. Shihab, or myself. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Earth 2022. Relentless and I have put this, been honored to be the co-chairs of this event. And so we're just delighted you're here, delighted to see you. It's been a labor of love, but it has been a labor. So we're just happy to see people coming out. And unlike last year's COVID window Earth Summit, this year we're hopefully a little more past or getting slightly past COVID. Last year hit that perfect divine window where we could have it before everything closed back down. But I'm excited to see you here, and so thank you for being here and participating. We've got a great panel. These are the people that have served, three people that have served as ambassador for international religious freedom in the job since its creation 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago. And I think you're going to be able to hear from them kind of the perspective of what's gotten done and what else we can do, which is what this panel and what this session is all about. It's how can we do more? We've got all this advocacy work that's going on. We've got all of you working on advocacy, which is fantastic, and we've still got all this persecution in the world. Why? What have we not done right? What can we do different? What should we do more of? With that, I'm going to go down the line and introduce everybody very quickly, just really from the time that they served. I'm not going to fill you in what all they're doing now because we've got a lot of different activities going on. I'm going to ask each of them to have 3 minutes of comments opening. I'm going to kind of bully people a little bit to move along and make sure we hit the time frame. And I hope I get to ask a question or two of the panel as what's taking place. First up will be John Hanford. He served as International Religious Freedom Ambassador from 2002 to 2009. I first met John when he worked in Senator Lugar's office getting the International Religious Freedom Act passed. He was one of the drafters of it and really one of the early operators and people that pushed this topic in Capitol Hill. Really, we stand on his shoulders getting the act passed. He created the ambassadorship, created the commission, a number of activities. And John, I don't know if you ever get adequately recognized for that, but this was a real pioneer in this field, and I really, really appreciate that. Susan Johnson-Cook is next. She served as the International Religious Freedom Ambassador from 2011 to 2013 in President Barack Obama's administration. Did a great job. I really appreciate the role that you went in and you served well in that role, and I deeply appreciate appreciate that. And then finally, we Rabbi David Sacristy, who was in that role, was nominated 2014, was my immediate predecessor. And I've worked a lot with David on any number of things around the world. Of the three, he's the one I see the most. We seem to travel together in a lot of these different activities. Most recently, we were both in Saudi Arabia, of all places, opening up and seeing that country open up a little bit to religious freedom, which that was a historic event that we were at. And so in a sense, I really feel like there's some credit there. Okay, Ambassador Hanford, 3 minutes, and tell us what you'd like us to hear.
Great, thank you, Sam. When I began working on international religious freedom back in the 1980s, as Sam referred to, there were just 2 organizations in DC and a handful of people focused on this issue. And I was the first and only person doing so in the US government. Now, it's such a joy to see so many dedicated to this cause out here. And I want to thank all of you for your devotion and for all that you have built together. I don't need to tell you this, but it's one of the greatest privileges imaginable to serve some of the most noble people in the world, and then to be constantly humbled and inspired by their example and their sacrifice. But by any measure, it is an overwhelming task we take on together. Well over half of the world is living under serious persecution or restriction of their freedom. But it's not just overwhelming in scope. Our cause is also one of the most difficult on earth to address, even, I would argue, one of the most daunting in history. We're attempting to persuade authoritarian governments or intractable religious majorities, sometimes thousands of miles away, to drastically change cultural norms that have often existed for centuries. That's a tough lift. So, if I am to condense down here in 2 minutes, decades of work, here's what I would commend. First, figure out where you are best gifted and positioned to serve the persecuted. Pick a lane and do it well. Maybe it's fact-finding or legal advocacy or humanitarian support for those who are suffering. I received some wise counsel when I had my first meeting with the Deputy Secretary of State. He said, John, don't try to take on the whole world. You'll wind up with little, if anything, accomplished. Figure out where you can bring lasting change and focus there. I took his advice, and if instead I had spread myself thin and not been dogged in our work on countries like Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, Turkmenistan, China, Eritrea, Uzbekistan, and a few others, I think we would have fallen far short of what we achieved. Secondly, be relentless. Be relentless. Whatever your role in advancing religious freedom, be relentless. There are no shortcuts in religious freedom work. People do not change easily, and nations do not change easily. This has been the lesson in my experience over and over again. Whether pushing for laws or constitutions to be revised, prisoners to be released, torture or executions to be stopped, I have found that it's almost always very, very difficult and sometimes takes years to bring change. Third, be a good ally with integrity to your fellow servants of the persecuted. Over the years, I've seen that advocacy of all sorts often attracts strong personalities that can wind up fracturing what ought to be cooperative efforts. We don't need armchair critics. We need allies. Don't try to build up your work by tearing down the work of others. No, let's cheer each other on. Let's honor each other's service and unique contributions. So in sum, let's press hard with integrity. Then, when we come together at important conferences like this summit, we'll be in the best position to learn from each other and advance our cause together. It's been a great privilege for me to work with many of you in this great endeavor, and thank you all for your service to the persecuted.
Appreciate that, John. Ambassador Cook.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be with you. I would start with saying thank you for your work for the persecuted all over the world. Not only did I have to pick a lane, I had to create some lanes. as the first African American, the first female, and first faith leader to come into the role. We created what was called the Faith Leaders Roundtable. We also created Female Faces of Faith, and the Female Faces of Faith turned into a roundtable so that many voices that were not at the table to discuss international religious freedom, but who had been doing the work, were able to be part of the conversation. So this is my formula: diversification, collaboration, cooperation, and it will equal transformation. And that we must make sure that there is also conversation among the voices who are doing the work, who continue to do the work. One of the things we were able to do, not just abroad, but over here as well, we were able to meet with counseling and refugees who have been able to escape the persecution or brought their families over and helped them escape persecution. We were able to meet with Uyghur families, Yazidis. And what we found most of all was that they wanted to help with not only the government's help, but they also wanted to be part of the help in helping their families settle here and also begin a new life here once they got here. And so one of the things I recommend in terms of conversation is to have discussion with the religious leaders of all major groups and continue what we did in government to happen outside of government, and to make sure that women are a part of that conversation. I've been fortunate and blessed enough to work with Brian Graham, Religious Freedom in Business, Shereen Taylor, Women in Religious Freedom in Films, Reverend Rob Shank, where I was able to meet with the Yazidis 1 week before it actually hit the news in terms of how they were being persecuted. All of that happened on these shores. Lastly, we were able to meet with the Religious Freedom Institute, which was at the time in the museum, and it was with Dr. Sabrina Dent. And for the first time, we were able to introduce international religious freedom as part of the curriculum for historically African-American theological seminaries. And so I think that I also work with Black women in ministry universally around the world. And so what we have found is that many of the women who are faith leaders are the ones who nurture the families who come here, whose husbands, in many cases, have been left on the continents and who are being persecuted. And so that part of the conversation needs to be, how do we nurture? How do we help those who have suffered trauma if they've been able to escape? How do we help make sure that their families and their descendants won't have the same persecution? So I think, as my formula started out, diversification, collaboration, consolidation, cooperation equals transformation. I'm very excited to see what's happening in terms of USERF, making sure that there are diverse voices in USERF, making sure that there are diverse voices on the staff of the International Religious Freedom Office, and making sure there's diversity in ambassadors. So we support certainly Ambassador Shad now, who's there, and I think he's the first Muslim to hold this role. I think we just need to make sure that there are all voices at the table, and that would make a serious difference. So not only do you have to choose a lane, sometimes you have to create the lane and then walk in that lane. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Master Sacristy. So very quickly, we were acknowledging people. I simply want to name 4 other people who deserve just to be named here. I was glad that you talked about the history that John played in terms of the history of all of this, but you should know that his wife Laura on the house side was playing a robust role as well. So they're kind of a power couple of the history of Earth here. Secondly, in this panoply of people, the person on my left here, Bob Seipel, father of Chris Seipel, was the first ambassador and set the standard in the foundation that all the rest of us have benefited from. Rashan Hussein, we couldn't have a better person in this position now. But I think all of us know that Sam Brownback lifted the standard of this work in so many different ways. And it's truly the last So a few thoughts about where we might go. That, you know, that as I understand the challenge, we're all doing everything we're doing, and yet persecution and discrimination and the challenges and restrictions on religious freedom are so pervasive and so heartbreaking all across the globe. What can be done differently? So let me just suggest a couple of things to think about. One is, we created this entire structure in part as an affirmative action program for the human rights world the Human Rights Office, the Human Rights Organizations, the regional human rights courts that weren't paying enough attention to religious freedom. We wanted to lift religious freedom up to the kind of attention free speech, freedom of the press, freedom of association, freedom of protest, and other fundamental human rights act. And I think we have succeeded in many regards about that. But I want to be clear, I'm going to focus on this in my remarks tomorrow. We know human rights makes it unless they all make it. If democracy falters and dies across the globe, we're not going to save religious freedom. There's no Noah's Ark for religious freedom here. We have to continue to push the human rights movement to back religious freedom, but we also need, more than we've done before, to push all of the religious leaders in the world and all of the proponents of religious freedom to push for protecting democracy and nurturing democracy and nurturing human rights as well. So that's number one. Number two, why is it that certain campaigns get attention and others don't? Why is it that Darfur captured fire with a 17-year civil war that killed and displaced more people than Kosovo, Bosnia, and Rwanda combined had really was just a small group of entities, and Sam Brownback played a very important role on the Hill as senator on that. Why is it happening that today, if you look at the Rohingya and Uyghur Muslims, they are capturing attention, Tibetan Buddhists in the past, and so many others don't, and we're often competing with each other for our particular group, our particular cause in thinking about it. Trying to work out what makes things work, and I think we know a lot of easy about it, to try and have a meta campaign on behalf of religious freedom with engaging media at the level we have to do with celebrities, at the level that we have to do to get the sort of tip on this issue can be vitally important in going forward. So I'll stop with that for right now. I have a couple of other thoughts, but I just wanted to think big about changes that might happen that would really make a difference.
Good thoughts. We sink or swim together. Okay, I'm going to try a little bit of a lightning round, and I'd like 1-minute answers, guys, if I could do that. We've got about 9.5 minutes left. John, why have we not succeeded thus far? And then I'm going to follow this up with what will it take to succeed. So give me 1 minute. Why have we not succeeded?
Well, part of the reason is that we're up against, as I said earlier, cultural traditions and norms that we can't expect to be overturned quickly. The second problem is, Sam, when I started in this work on the Hill, I was getting my information through the mail and through the phone. We didn't have the internet then. But now, not only are we helped by hearing about problems and able to jump on them quickly, but the other side is able to see what efforts of persecution work. We see anti-conversion laws, for example, spreading, and so tactics of persecution can spread, and authoritarian governments that crack down give, unfortunately, ideas to other authoritarian governments. So we're up against that sort of a globalization of persecution. I don't think we should be too hard on ourselves. We've had a lot of successes. We heard about some earlier and some represented in this room, and I'll touch on that later.
Susan, why have we not succeeded this far?
First, I gotta say, you have me between the ambassador who uses his left hand and the rabbi who uses his right hand. So I'm like, they're very expressive. So thank you very much. So I think, Ambassador Heffer talked about, cultural norms. And I think when you talk about cultural norms, you have to have people not just going in, but you have to have someone who's from that culture who helps you tackle the problems that historically have been there. The second is, I would suggest that we get together more often, having been in the role. I mean, this is our second time. I think all of us are together in the last 25 years. And I would suggest that we get together because each of us has seen some advancements under our tenure. And when we put those all together, we can say where we need to go from here. So I would suggest frequently for us to be able to be in dialogue, and I think that would begin some conversations. We all have our networks, but we also can make sure that those networks take us to places where perhaps the other one couldn't go.
David, why?
Well, I suggested this Met campaign precisely because the vast majority of the world, despite all of our efforts, don't know. They simply don't know what's going on. And if they did, and we were doing it effectively, it could make a profound difference. I suggested the other point of this in terms of human rights, because in part, we're competing with so many crises across the globe. So many crises. Crises of race in the world, the crises of gender in the world, the crisis of climate change in the world, the crisis of pandemics in the world, the crisis of structural economic inequities. Here, and we have a sense that we're at crossroads and we're running out of time and we're overwhelmed by all the problems. How do we take this problem and either lift it up or show it's indispensable to achieving these other ones as well here? And we have to think more holistically in order to do that.
John, what's the biggest thing you've got, or we've got, maybe as a movement, right, over the last 25 years? What's the biggest thing we've gotten right?
Well, I'll focus on our niche. Our niche has been to work government to government because open diplomatic channels allows us to get in the door, sit face to face, and negotiate for hours and hours and hours. And I was famous for having the longest meetings with U.S. officials because there was so much to cover. And it's worked. When I was there, we saw Vietnam do a U-turn. They were in intense persecution. And by working with them, then adding them to the CPC list of the worst violators, and then getting them to sign a binding agreement, it's like a treaty, and working them off, it was remarkable. The U-turn that they did, it's the only time I've seen a sitting government make a change like that. But it can happen. It can happen again and again. With Saudi Arabia, a lot of time spent traveling there, meeting, and they, in the end, were willing to say that they would remove all intolerant references in all of their school books that they propagate to hundreds of thousands of madrasas around the world using their oil money. And they were pledging that they would remove all intolerance towards other religions, which includes Muslims too, Jews, Christians, and then we followed up a lot with that. So in our niche, it can work. We simply need more firepower. We need other governments coming on board, and they are. There's a lot to be encouraged about on that front, I believe.
I totally agree on the government to government, getting our foot in the door. I also think where we weren't able to do that, having the multilateral conversations for the UN General Assembly, I think that those were places where we also saw some inching where they may not have given before, but they said, now we're in the room with others, and so we have to make some differences. The escape, helping the pastors in Iran to be able to escape, I think that was major, and we focused all of our attention at that one time. We made that a priority, and I think that was a major advancement as well. So we saw so many changes, but I think it's inch by inch, and I think we should give ourselves credit for the places that we did make a difference.
Well, just into what Ambassador Kutcher said, that she really helped put on the table the need to have women at the table everywhere, at every level, if we're going to make a difference. It really is the last part of your lasting legacy here. What was this entire enterprise about? It was that religious groups and NGOs can't do this alone. It requires government. John made that point over and over again. We had to move government and governments to make a difference. I think we made a profound difference in that. We have structured things. During the Kerry administration, when I served in the Religion and Global Affairs Office, it was as large and robust as our office. We had more full-time professionals working on religion and foreign policy than all the governments in the world combined. The annual report we did required now, after all these years, thousands of foreign service officers to go and meet with press groups and persecuted groups and get their story and put it into the report. It's transformed the culture of the Foreign Service in terms of understanding this issue. And then Sam Brown that came along, actually building on what Yusuf and Max Haynes and then my office did to build the contact group, came up with this vision of pulling off the ministerial that has so engaged. You look around the world and see the impact we've had, where there are now ambassadors in other countries, there are now dedicated foreign service officers in other countries. There's now more cooperation, engagement in terms of working it. All together, that is an enormous impact, and that puts us in a very strong position to meet the daunting challenges.
And I'm going to call my own number here. I think we need to start putting economic sanctions associated with religious persecution and I think we need to start making them light. I think the Uyghur Forced Labor Act, although that's not technically a Religious Freedom Act, I consider it a product of religious freedom activists, and it's got economic sanctions with it. When you get a bite, you get an answer. All right, we've got 1 minute here, David. I'm going to start with you. What is your prayer for this group? 15 seconds. What's your prayer for this group, Rabbi?
That you can never lose hope. We are the eternal optimists on these things. My mentor, Al Horseman, used to say, the difference between an optimist and a pessimist is that an optimist argues this is the best of all possible worlds. A pessimist agrees. We are the eternal optimists here, and together, you and I together, we really can change the world. Susan?
My prayer is that we never stop praying, we never stop working together. When we work together, we walk together, we win together, and there is hope. So keep hope alive, to use Reverend Jesse Jackson's term, but let's not stop doing what we're doing. Let's just do it together. When we work together, we can win together.
Mr. Hanford.
Your question about prayer and your emphasis on it prompts me to also say, prayer is the most effective thing by far, and puts our work to shame, and so that would be my encouragement. But also, many of you are in a position to do work that we cannot do, that all the governments together cannot do, that NGOs working through a personal relationship with a local official or a religious leader can perhaps lead them to see things in a different way. And then we can work together, but sometimes we need to keep that work quiet. If we're trying to stop an execution of someone in a very conservative Islamic country, which some of us have been involved in, that needs to be done quietly, because usually the population, not just the leaders, would want to see the person executed. So more power to those of you in the NGO community.
And we should add that the effort that Greg Mitchell's leading on to take the roundtable that you so strengthened here and make that a phenomenon across the globe is one important piece moving forward. But what would your prayer for these people, the folks gathered here, Ambassador Reed?
My prayer is that this grassroots movement goes global, and that this is a grassroots movement. Grassroots movements change governments. Governments address each other, but if you want to change the government, you got to do it from the bottom up. And I think if really every faith community in the world would embrace religious freedom for everybody, not just for your own faith community, but for everybody, I think we transform these governments that are persecuting people. We've got to stand together, but it's got to be grassroots. It's got to be churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, all banding together in these religious freedom roundtables at the grassroots and changing the tops. Everybody, we love you. I know most of you in the room, I think, and I'm just really proud of all of you for what you guys have done and how you inspire us. And I'm like John, I remember when you could call a religious freedom meeting and you'd have 5 people in the room. That was counting my dog. It was a small group, and now you're an army, and this army needs to take over and change the world for everybody that is voiceless and being persecuted. God bless you.
Murdering every spiritual leader of the Sufi order in the process. And not that the Sufis are in opposition to taking the arms to overthrow the regime. On the contrary, the Modified Sufis' worldview is based on love, peace, unity, and altruism, which can best be summarized by 2 statements that were named after Noor Abu death, who was murdered by the regime on December 24, 2019. 1. Nothing is holier than a human being's life, and there is no pious deed more valuable than serving those in need. And 2. In helping those in need, a Sufi should be nurtured and life-giving as a stream of pure water, and it is the Sufis' moral duty to stand to justice and oppression to the fullest, even to his or her detriment. Through a network of charitable institutions all across Iran, the Untitled Sufis have been a major source of relief for the needs of society. The popularity and respect for the Sufis and other minds have always been a major point of contention for Persian traditional healers, especially when a regime has no regard for human life and presumes the determination of resources for its own purposes. According to human rights organizations, more than half of all executions in the world last year were in Iran consistently ranks in the worst performers in human rights violations. And this is why the ruling regime's theoreticians have consistently identified Ayatollah Sufism as the single greatest existential threat to the ideologies of founding foundations of Islam and Republic, as they fear that the Sufis' worldview and practice of Islam will cause mass defection and refugees and revolution of our borders. There are stories of religious degrees with fatwas by the most prominent members of the ruling clergy against Ayatollah Sufis. The ruling regime laid the foundations for an all-out religious war against them. The clergy depict that the Ayatollah Sufis are blasphemous religious infidels for the satanic interpretation of Islam, and wrote the practice of Islam as an American British Zionist Islam, meaning to weaken and spread evil in the eyes of the